A university professor must balance three main areas of professional effort: teaching, research, and service. The 1970s, more than any other decade, marked Charlie Nam's most intensive dedication to the third of these areas: service to the professional discipline. In addition to his service as chair of the sociology department at Florida State, for Charlie, this service to the discipline took the form of active participation in and leadership of the Population Association of America, the core professional association for demographers.
Well, my first PAA conference was in 1952 when I was a junior professional at the Census Bureau. The meeting took place at Princeton University. I continued attending PAA conferences for a very long while. At one point, I was recognized for having attended the longest consecutive PAA conferences of any member of PAA. After I retired, travel became more difficult for me, and my string of attendances was broken. I almost always presented a paper at such conferences.
How did you come to serve on the PAA's board of directors already by 1967? You'd only been at Florida State for 3 years. Was this due to a combination of your experience at Census and your new full professor academic rank?
Yes, serving on the PAA board of directors in 1967 was due to my visibility at that time. I was known by census personnel as well as academic leaders. I already had grants and publications. Prior to being put on the board, I chaired the PAA Committee on Population Statistics.
The official journal of the PAA, Demography, started publication just about the time that you arrived at FSU in the mid-60s. Please describe the conditions and decisions that led up to the establishment of Demography's editorial office at FSU in 1972 and your experiences as the editor of the journal for the next 2 years.
Well, Norman Ryder, who was an officer of PAA at that time in 1972, called me on the phone and said that I was recommended for the editorship of the journal. I told him that I thought that might be premature, but he disagreed and I became the editor.
Before someone agrees to become the editor of a professional journal, particularly if that journal is the official publication of a professional association like the Population Association of America, you have to be sure that you have the institutional support and infrastructure to conduct all the work that comes with the job. An editor is responsible for monitoring the constant flow of incoming research papers submitted for possible publication, rejecting some of them out of hand as unsuitable for that particular journal, and then finding competent scholars who will agree to review each paper and make a judgment about publication, including recommendations for what it might need to change in case the judgment turns out to be revise and resubmit. Then the editor must assemble the opinions of the external reviewers, make a decision about the fate of each paper, and communicate with the authors. No one person can possibly handle all of this work for a journal with a reputation like that of Demography. Fortunately, in the Center for Study of Population at Florida State University, Charlie Nam had the infrastructure and staff to help with all those tasks and highly competent colleagues to assist with the evaluation of manuscripts.
Dave Sly, Bob Weller, and Tom Espenshade, who were then on my center colleagues, were important associate editors of the journal. I introduced some new approaches in the journal, including debates among demographers on some topics where they disagreed.
After serving a successful term as the editor of Demography, and because they knew him well from his service on the board of directors, the inner circle of leaders within the Population Association reached a consensus that Charlie should be nominated for the path leading to the association's highest office.
Well, I did progress annually from second vice president to first vice president to president elect to president in succeeding years. A note about the presidential election here. I was put up against Daniel Price, who had been one of my professors at North Carolina. Dan was gracious about being defeated. He told me that he had not won. He would tell people that a student of his became the president. Most of what a PAA president does is determined routines developed by earlier presidents of the board.
Each year at the annual conference of the PAA, the incoming president has a chance to prepare and present a presidential address at the assembled membership meeting. Unlike a research paper presented in one of countless small sessions during the conference, this address is an opportunity for the new president to reach a significant share of the entire PAA membership, so deciding what to put into that presentation is quite an important decision.
Well, deciding what to focus on in my presidential address was a bit difficult. Earlier presidents spoke about their principal research topics. At that time, I was more of a generalist in demography, with emphasis on textbooks and monographs. That led me to focus on demography as a science, its strengths and associations.
Did you consider any other topics before settling on this one, or was that by default?
As you know, I had done a lot of work at the Census Bureau with education in relation to population, and that was something I wrote a number of articles on and a book. But I didn't think that was a topic that would appeal to a lot of people in population association.
At about the midpoint of the annual conference, after the first day or two of scientific sessions, the presidential address session usually takes place in the late afternoon as the culmination of the general membership meeting of the association. The chair of this session is the current outgoing president of the PAA. Formal ceremonies confer several awards for excellence in research by graduate students, young scholars, and celebrated veterans in population research. And then the new incoming president, like Charlie Nam on that Friday afternoon in Philadelphia, takes the podium in front of the assembled Population Association and delivers the presidential address. When it is finished, everyone troops out to some nearby location in the convention hotel for a celebratory cocktail party where social networking runs rampant and vital professional contacts are created and renewed. When Charlie stepped to the podium and began his presentation, the first issue he addressed concerned the perennial issue facing demographers, that most people, even within academia itself, are only vaguely aware that demography exists as a discipline in its own right.
Having argued that demography is justified as a science on its own, but of recent vintage, the delay in emerging departments or independent programs on demography occurred because other disciplines included discussions of population change as it related to their subject matter. That is still the case today, although there are now many demography degree programs and at least one department of demography in the U.S. and several in other countries. Well, I think that a core focus of demography is understanding the critical subject matter of population change and analyzing factors contributing to that change as well as the consequences of the change.
You give an entertaining description of how demography seemed satisfied to focus on demographic transition as a theoretical center of gravity in the mid 20th century. What did you think of it in 1979 as the future of demographic theory?
Demographers were slow to consider population theory. Malthus gave rise to theoretical considerations, but his writing did not provide a benchmark for population theory. The notion that the demographic transition framework can facilitate theory had many supporters. but it provided more of a descriptive analysis than a theoretical one. My idea about population theory in 1979 was that there was no overarching population theory, but there were reasonable theoretical perspectives with regard to components of population change.
What about formal demography? Is that theory or is that just method? Stable population theory and the formal mathematical demography.
Yeah,
Is that a theory?
from a mathematical point of view, it's certainly can be considered theory, but it wouldn't be theory in the broader social determination.
This article discusses the interdisciplinary focus of demography as a potential strength rather than a weakness. Do you still see it that way today? What are the strengths versus weaknesses that come from an interdisciplinary perspective?
A basic strength of an interdisciplinary focus of demography is the contribution other disciplines can make to comprehending population structure and change. If there is any weakness in advancing an interdisciplinary focus of demography, it may be the different languages of disciplines and the difficulty in cross communication.
Not much has changed for demography as an academic discipline in more than 40 years since this PAA presidential address. Applied professional jobs for demographers have multiplied tremendously in our data rich social environment, driven by a rising demand for people who can assemble and interpret population statistics and apply their results to practical policy concerns in both private and public sectors. But fundamental demographic research and training of demographers still involve scholars embedded in many other academic disciplines. Practicing demographers still hold various kinds of titles and degrees. Demography has been described as a meta-discipline, existing where the frontiers of other formal academic disciplines overlap and encounter one another. Along with other metadisciplines such as biophysics, informatics, or psycholinguistics, demography occupies a creative zone resembling the biodiverse estuaries where freshwater, land, and seawater mix in tidal interactions, producing some of the most dynamic, stimulating environments for the development of knowledge today. Through his own teaching and research and his service to the Population Association of America, Charlie Nam has spent his entire career in this exciting demographic intertidal zone.
Well, being PAA president was a great honor for me. Excuse me, was a great honor for me, and it further contributed to my career in population studies.